A young princess stands before a mirror, her reflection showing not beauty but a curse, her jaw too large, her spine twisted, her body a museum of deformities. This is the mark of her royal blood, a blood so pure it became poison. Europe's inbred princesses were bred for power, but born to suffer unimaginable pain. What dark secret did their opulent palaces hide? What was truly behind the suffering of these royal women? And why did no one stop it? If you could whisper a warning to one of these forgotten princesses, what would you say? Tell us in the comments below, and help me reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep exposing history's darkest secrets. Hit subscribe and like right now. For kings, marrying family wasn't strange at all. In fact, it was a very old and sacred rule. They believed it was the only way to keep power and riches inside the family circle. This made sure that land, money, and power stayed with those who already had it. Royal blood was seen as something like liquid gold. It was thought to be too special, too precious, to ever mix with common people. Marrying someone outside the royal line was a huge insult, almost like throwing away a treasure. Kings believed their blood made them special and chosen to rule. Each marriage in a royal family was much more than just a wedding. It was like a big business deal, carefully planned out. Its main goal was to double the family's royal heritage and their claims to different thrones. A marriage could bring new lands, armies, and titles to the family. But these marriages between close family members also doubled something else. They doubled hidden weaknesses and terrible curses that nobody could see at first. Over time, these secret flaws would come out in horrible ways, harming the children born from such unions. Women in these royal families often paid the highest price for these rules. Their bodies aim like labs for these royal experiments in blood purity. They were forced to marry, forced to have children, and often suffered greatly because of it. Their wishes did not matter at all. They were mostly seen as cradles, important only for carrying heirs to the throne. Their job was to produce strong, healthy babies, but often their own bodies became like coffins for their own lives. They died young, worn out by constant childbirth and deep sickness. In 1462, a princess named Juana was born into a beautiful lie. This lie was so big and so strong that it would end up ruining her entire life. She was a royal baby, but her birth brought a huge scandal and much talk. Whispers started going around that her father was not truly the king, Henry V of Castile. Instead, people said her real father was a handsome courtier, a man named Beltran de la Cueva. This rumor was a huge attack on the king's honor and Juana's right to rule. As she grew from a baby into a young girl, people started to notice strange things about her. They saw her hands, which sometimes looked like claws. They also saw that her spine, her backbone, was curving in an unnatural way. These were not normal signs for a child. Doctors and wise men were called to examine her. They would measure her body, looking very carefully. They hoped to find proof of who her true father was, signs written in her bones or her body shape. This was a cruel way to treat a young child. Even if people thought she was a bastard, meaning not the king's true child, her young body was already promised. She was betrothed to her cousin, Alfonso V of Portugal. This was a deal made when she was still a child, with no say in her own future. This planned marriage risked making a monster, not just politically, but genetically. It would combine too many close family genes from two royal lines that were already linked. The chances of more problems in their children were very high. Her supposed deformities and unusual looks quickly became weapons. These were used in a big war over who should truly rule Castile, a powerful kingdom. People who did not want her to be queen pointed to her body as proof that she was not truly royal. At the age of 16, Juana was forced to marry Alfonso, her cousin, many times over. This union made the future of any children she might have a true genetic nightmare. The chance of them being born with terrible problems was huge. She had one daughter, but the baby tragically died very soon after birth. It is very likely that this baby died from the heavy burden of too much royal blood, meaning too many bad genes from generations of inbreeding. Her body was too weak to live. Juana spent her last years inside a quiet convent. Her twisted hands, often in pain, were used for praying. She prayed for a different life, a life she never got to choose for herself. What other dark destinies awaited royal brides caught in this trap? Maria Anna of Spain was born in 1631. When she was just 7 years old, she could not speak clearly. It seemed as if her tongue felt too big for her mouth, making words hard to form. This was one of the first signs of her hidden struggles. Her parents were uncle and a niece. This was a common but very dangerous kind of marriage in the powerful Habsburg family. They often married close relatives to keep their bloodline pure and their power strong. Maria Anna's spine, her backbone, was curved. Her hips often hurt, and walking was always a painful show for her. Each step was a struggle, and it became clear that her body was not formed properly. Court artists were very clever. They painted her to hide these physical flaws. They would make her look graceful and beautiful, turning her illness into an image of quiet elegance. But behind the paint, the sickness was real. At 15 years old, she was promised to her uncle Ferdinand III, who was the Holy Roman Emperor. This meant their children would face even riskier genes. It piled more genetic problems on top of what was already there. Her wedding journey across Europe was like a grand parade. She was seen as an exotic, beautiful oddity, a rare prize. People stared at her, not fully knowing the pain she carried beneath her rich clothes. For 14 years, Maria Anna was often pregnant. Her body became like a factory, constantly making babies that often died young. This cycle of birth and death was incredibly hard on her already weak body. Her children, who did survive, still carried the famous Habsburg jaw. They also had the curved spine and sometimes clouded, unclear eyes. These were clear signs of the inbreeding that ran through their royal family. By the age of 29, constant pregnancies and her own deformities had turned her into a very fragile shell of a person. She was weak, thin, and her body was giving up. She had suffered so much in her short life. Her death was officially linked to childbirth. But the truth was, her body had been slowly crushed and destroyed by her own bones. The deformities of her skeleton had slowly killed her. How many more women suffered this silent torment, hidden behind royal walls? In 1651, a small princess named Margaret Theresa was born. She became famous in one of history's most well-known paintings, Velázquez's Las Meninas. The painting shows her as a sweet, innocent child, but the painting did not show her true state. In real life, she was small and very fragile. She was not growing properly, and her body seemed to be always weak. She was a delicate child from birth. Her parents were also uncle and niece. This kept piling up genetic risks with every new generation of the Habsburg family. Each marriage between close relatives brought more chances of sickness and deformity. Her father, Philip IV, already showed the deep signs of Habsburg inbreeding. He had the very big jaw, often called the Habsburg jaw, and tired-looking eyes. These features were passed down through his family. Margaret's spine, her backbone, curved sharply. Her legs also grew at different rates, meaning one was longer than the other. This made every single step she took hard and painful. She often struggled to walk. Portraits were always made to hide her tiny size and her deformities. They tried to turn her sickness into a picture of aristocratic beauty and grace. They wanted the world to see a perfect princess, not a suffering child. She was betrothed, promised in marriage, to her uncle, Leopold I. He also had very clear signs of genetic problems from inbreeding. Their union would combine even more of these bad genes. Her wedding in Vienna was a grand and very public show, but her beautiful dress needed many big changes. These changes were made to hide her body's true, uneven shape and her deformities. Her pregnancies were a cruel gamble. Her first baby died within just a few hours of being born. The baby was too twisted and deformed to live, a tragic result of the very close family genes. She did have one daughter who survived, named Maria Antonia, but Maria Antonia also carried the heavy marks of Habsburg genes. She too would suffer from the family's unhealthy past. By the age of 19, many failed pregnancies and the strain on her weak body had turned Margaret into a weak ghost of an empress. She was thin, pale, and fading away quickly. She died at the very young age of 21 during her final pregnancy. Her body simply gave up after too much strain and too much suffering. It could not take any more. What untold stories of pain and death lie in the royal graveyards, hidden from public view. Maria Antonia, who was Margaret Theresa's daughter, began to cough up blood when she was just 11 years old. Her lungs were damaged because her chest was curved and badly formed. She struggled to breathe every day. She died at the young age of 27 from problems related to her 7th pregnancy. Her organs were crushed and damaged by her own bones, which were twisted from her birth defects. Her body simply could not keep going. Marie Louise of Spain was born to the severely inbred King Charles II. She struggled to eat and stand properly. This was because of serious problems with her jaw and her spine. Every meal and every step was a challenge. She also died young, her body giving out completely. Her organs were displaced, meaning they were pushed out of place by her twisted rib cage. Her internal body was as damaged as her outside. Isabella Clara Eugenia suffered greatly too. She was blind in one eye and could not have children naturally. She had many miscarriages, losing baby after baby. This was a clear genetic lesson in reproductive failure. But most tragic of all were the unnamed baby girls. They were born too twisted and deformed to live for long. They were never given names or public funerals, their lives hidden from history. These tiny babies had skulls that were not properly formed. Their spines were like knots, terribly twisted. Their organs were too messed up and disorganized for life outside their mother's womb. They died almost as soon as they were born. They were buried in secret, often in unmarked graves. Their short, painful lives proved the dark and deadly cost of trying to keep royal blood pure. It was a purity that brought death and suffering. Royal nurseries, places meant for new life, instead became graveyards. They were filled with tiny coffins. These little coffins were more common to see than christening gowns showing how many royal babies died. Who was truly to blame for these terrible tragedies, these endless deaths and deformities? By the 1800s, European royals could no longer ignore the huge genetic disaster they had created. The problems were too widespread and too obvious to deny anymore. The terrible truth was plain to see. The famous Habsburg jaw, once thought to be a noble feature, was finally seen for what it truly was, just a sickness. It was not a sign of divine or special blood, but a clear sign of genetic problems. Pale skin, once considered a mark of royal beauty, was understood to be anemia. Anemia means having too little healthy blood. Curved spines were not graceful, but scoliosis, a painful medical condition. Charles II of Spain is famous for his many deformities and sicknesses. He was a male example of inbreeding's effects, but his female relatives, the princesses, suffered just as much, often in private and without anyone truly knowing their pain. Modern science today shows that Habsburg inbreeding was worse than what is allowed for farm animals. The level of close family marriage was so extreme that it would be against the law for livestock. Royal children often had the genes of siblings, sometimes even more than cousins. This extremely close genetic link led to terrible deformities and many early deaths. Their family tree was too tangled. Hemophilia, another royal disease seen in other royal lines, was in some ways less cruel. It often killed quickly, but Habsburg inbreeding often made life long and miserably painful for those who suffered from it. Princesses carried the heaviest burden in these families. Their bodies were constantly tested and pushed to the limit to produce the next generation of often sick rulers. They were tools, not people. Infant deaths in these royal families reached as high as 50%. This was not always from common sicknesses. It was mostly from terrible birth defects caused by generations of inbreeding. The Spanish Habsburg line, a powerful royal house, finally ended. It was not because of war or outside enemies. It ended because of biology, because of simple genetic failure. There were no healthy heirs left. The princesses who lived were often invalids, meaning they were always sick or disabled. They were living reminders that blood purity was a deadly lie, a cruel joke that destroyed lives. Imagine the last Habsburg princess, whose name we don't even know. She lived only for 3 days in the year 1700. Her short life was a final, tragic proof of the family's curse. Her spine was so twisted that she couldn't breathe properly. Her skull was fused wrong, not formed correctly. Her internal organs were a deadly puzzle, all messed up inside her tiny body. Doctors studied her, trying to understand what was wrong. But she died too fast, too quickly, for her to even be given a royal name or a proper ceremony. She was just another lost baby. This unnamed baby proved the terrible, undeniable truth. Royal bloodlines had become poisonous. The very thing they tried to keep pure had become their undoing, a source of death. It wasn't magic or divine punishment that twisted these girls' bodies. It was simple science and bad math. The math of genetics, badly done over hundreds of years, was the real culprit. Kings used their own daughters as test subjects in this terrible experiment. They were breeding for power and control instead of caring for the health and well-being of their own children. The real curse was men who valued pure blood, a made-up idea, more than their own children's lives. They sacrificed their offspring for a concept that brought only pain. They saw crooked spines and saw chances for power, for continuing their rule. They did not see cries for medical help or children in pain. They saw political tools, not suffering humans. They painted deformities as grace and elegance, all while these young girls died in terrible pain from their ruined bodies. The royal paintings were beautiful lies. These princesses were not monsters, as some whispered. They were victims of cruel choices, aided by powerful men seeking to hold on to power at any cost. History often remembers the great kings and their victories, but the real horror was in the nurseries, behind closed doors. There, genetic roulette was called divine will, and children paid the price. The famous Habsburg jaw, the curved spines, the early deaths, these were not mysteries anymore. They were the certain results of bad breeding, of a family tree too tightly woven. Some princesses, the older ones, might have understood their terrible fate. They might have known the genetic lottery they had lost. Others died too young to even know why they suffered. Their twisted, pained bodies became monuments. They showed the failure of chasing pure blood, a poison that slowly killed queens and princesses generation after generation. Kings called these genetic disasters divine will, saying God had meant it to be so. But they did this because admitting the truth would mean their sacred blood was just human, after all. These princesses were not cursed by witches or evil spirits. They were killed by the hard, unbending math of inbreeding. Science, not superstition, explains their agony. Their twisted spines and damaged bodies tell the true story of royalty. Even kings and emperors cannot escape the simple, powerful laws of life and genetics. They cannot beat biology. This was not just a wedding. It was a weapon of power, a slow poison dressed in silk and jewels. If this shocking story opened your eyes to a hidden truth, help me reach 1,000 subscribers by subscribing now. And tell me in the comments which royal scandal or dark secret you want us to uncover next. This was not just a wedding, it was a weapon of power, a slow poison dressed in silk and jewels. If this shocking story opened your eyes to a hidden truth, help me reach 1,000 subscribers by subscribing now. And tell me in the comments which royal scandal or dark secret you want us to uncover next. But the LWS of nature do not care about crowns or kingdoms. They do not care about ancient rules or family pride. Biology always wins in the end, no matter how powerful a king might be. The royal families learned this lesson the hardest way possible. They learned it through their children's cries, through twisted limbs, and through graves dug too soon. They learned it through endless pain. The cost of their choices was written on the bodies of their daughters. It was a terrible, unreadable language of suffering that only science could truly understand hundreds of years later. Every crooked spine was a silent scream. Every tiny coffin held a broken promise. These were the true stories of power gone wrong, of a blind chase for purity that only brought poison. Think of the unseen suffering in those grand palaces. Imagine the mothers holding their deformed babies, knowing deep down that something was horribly wrong, but they couldn't speak the truth. They had to pretend these children were blessings. They had to say that it was God's will, even as their hearts broke. The weight of royal expectations was heavier than any crown. The doctors knew too. They saw the strange shapes, the weak bodies, the endless illnesses. But they were paid to stay silent, to offer useless remedies, and to hide the terrible truth. They wrote down confusing diagnoses in their old medical books. They made up fancy words to describe what was really simple genetic damage. They helped keep the secret for centuries. The nurses and servants in the nurseries lived with the horror daily. They cleaned up after the sick children. They carried the tiny coffins to unmarked graves. They saw everything, but they were just servants. Their words had no power against the might of kings. They were forced to watch, to serve, and to keep the darkest secrets of the royal house hidden. So the grand deception continued generation after generation. It was a cruel game of make-believe. The entire court pretended that everything was perfectly fine. Even as death became a constant visitor, the royal painters kept drawing beautiful lies. They brushed away the deformities, softened the harsh edges of illness, and created images of perfect children and elegant empresses. These paintings hang in museums today, admired by millions, but behind the beauty is a hidden truth. They are monuments to a massive cover-up, hiding the real, painful history. They show us the world the kings wanted us to see. A world of divine right, of perfect bloodlines, of unending beauty and power. Not a world of genetic nightmares and suffering children. The princesses themselves were trapped in this gilded cage. They were taught from birth that their purpose was to marry and produce heirs. Their personal happiness was not part of the plan. They had no voice, no choice. Their bodies were not their own. They belonged to the kingdom, to the bloodline. They were instruments for power, not individuals with dreams and feelings. Some may have felt shame for their deformities, thinking they were cursed by God. They might have blamed themselves, never knowing the scientific truth behind their pain. Their lives were filled with pain, illness, and the constant pressure to produce healthy babies. This was a task their broken bodies were often unable to complete. The death of their babies was a double tragedy. It was a deep, personal sorrow mixed with the crushing failure of their royal duty. They were never allowed to just be mothers who grieved. The few who lived to adulthood often endured a lifetime of disability. They were invalids, always sick, always in pain. Their bodies were living monuments to their family's terrible mistake. Imagine knowing that your own body was a betrayal, that the blood your family cherished was actually the source of your misery. This was the silent torment they carried every day. They were literally bred for power, but born to suffer. Their entire existence was a testament to the idea that some men believed control and lineage were more important than human life itself. This dark history forces us to ask tough questions. How far is too far in the pursuit of power? What is the true cost when human dignity is sacrificed for ambition? The stories of these princesses are not just old tales from dusty books. They are powerful warnings from the past, echoing into our modern world. They remind us about the dangers of unchecked power. They warn us about the dangers of blind tradition. They show what happens when science and reason are ignored in favor of old, harmful beliefs. The human cost is always immense. Even today, we see echoes of this mindset. People still judge others by superficial ideas of purity or lineage. We still prioritize power and status over well-being and basic human rights. These royal women, trapped in their opulent prisons, deserve to be remembered, not as figures in paintings, but as real people who suffered immensely for a flawed ideology. Their stories pull back the curtain on the glittering illusion of royalty. They show us the dark secrets hidden behind the golden facades of castles and crowns. They tell us that even the most powerful families on Earth are subject to the same biological rules as everyone else. No amount of wealth or status can change the laws of nature. The sacred mathematics of royal blood was a lie. It was a formula for disaster, not for eternal power. It brought decay, not strength. The princesses were the living proof of this failure. Their bodies became the battlefield where royal ambition clashed with scientific reality, and reality always won. So when you see those portraits in museums, look closer. See beyond the elegant gowns and the serene faces. Try to imagine the pain, the struggle, the silent agony behind the noble pose. Remember Juana, with her curvy, edged spine and claw-like hands praying in a convent. She was a victim of a political game, her body used as a weapon against her. Remember Maria Anna, struggling to speak, her hips in constant pain, her body worn out by endless pregnancies. She was sacrificed for the illusion of a pure bloodline. Remember Margaret Theresa, the doll-like empress, her tiny body failing, her first baby too twisted to live. She was a fragile pawn in a grand dynastic chess game. Remember Maria Antonia and Marie Louise, whose bodies were crushed by their own bones. They died young, their organs displaced, their lives cut short by the very genes they inherited. And remember the unnamed baby girls, buried in secret, never given a chance at life. Their tiny, broken bodies scream the loudest truth about this royal tragedy. They were not just historical footnotes, they were human beings. They had lives that were stolen, dreams that were crushed, and pain that was ignored. They were victims of a system that valued bloodline over life, power over compassion, and tradition over truth. A system that ultimately destroyed itself from within. Their suffering finally led to change, slowly, painfully. The old ways of royal inbreeding eventually declined, not because of a sudden burst of compassion, but because the genetic cost became too high to ignore. The lessons these princesses offer are timeless. They teach us the importance of understanding science, valuing human health, and challenging beliefs that cause harm. They remind us that true strength doesn't come from pure blood or rigid traditions. It comes from valuing life, embracing knowledge, and making choices that protect future generations. These princesses endured a silent torment, hidden behind palace walls. But their tragic stories, once whispered, can now be heard clearly. They can finally speak their truth. Their voices, though long silenced, echo through history. They tell us a profound truth about power, legacy, and the undeniable force of nature. This weapon, as not just a wedding, it was a weapon of power, a slow poison dressed in silk and jewels. If this shocking story opened your eyes to a hidden truth, help me reach 1,000 subscribers by subscribing now, and tell me in the comments which royal scandal or dark secret you want us to uncover next.